The jingle was the first thing to pierce the mundane quiet of the Promise Creek Savings and Loan. It was a sound both sharp and melodic, like tiny silver bells chiming in a discordant rhythm. Catherine Turner, known to everyone in town, as Kate looked up from the deposit slip she was completing. The sound was wrong. It didn't belong to the dull thud of a farmer's work boots or the gentle swish of a lady's skirt. It was the sound of purpose, of menace, and it sliced through the dusty, sunlit air of the bank with the precision of a razor. 3 men had entered. Their faces were obscured by grimy bandanas, their hands filled with pistols that seemed to drink the light from the room. The lead robber, a tall man with a cruel set to his shoulders, was the source of the sound. On his boots were a pair of ornate silver spurs, each with a small star-shaped rowel that spun and chimed with his every predatory step. Panic erupted. A woman shrieked. The bank teller, young Mr. Abernathy, threw his hands into the air so fast he nearly lost his balance. But Kate was frozen. The world had dissolved into a maelstrom of sound and memory, and at its heart was that damnable jingle. Jingle jangle. The memory hit her not as a thought, but as a physical blow. The summer sun of 1878, hot enough to bake the dust into a hardpan crust. The scent of gunpowder, acrid and bitter. Her father's surprised grunt, a sound of air being forced from his lungs. His body collapsing in a heap on the boardwalk in front of their store, a dark stain blossoming on the front of his simple wool coat. And standing 20 paces away, Victor Holloway, his smoking pistols held loosely at his sides. He had walked away then, his confident stride punctuated by the exact same sound. The jingle of silver spurs, a triumphant death knell that had echoed in her nightmares for 6 long years. Jingle jangle. The robber in the present was moving now, his spurs chiming as he crossed the floor. He shoved old Mr. Gable, the town's retired blacksmith, toward the wall. "On your knees, old man, all of you." The sharp command shattered Kate's paralysis. The past and present collided with a force that stole her breath. It wasn't just the sound. It was the man's posture, the cruel satisfaction in the sliver of eyes visible above his bandana. He cornered Mr. Gable, who was trembling too much to comply, and pressed the barrel of his pistol to the old man's temple. I said, "On your knees." The metallic click of the hammer being cocked was deafening in the sudden silence. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the terrible familiar music of the spurs. The world narrowed to that single horrific image, a powerful man terrorizing the weak, the same story, a different day. The visceral terror she'd felt as a 17-year-old girl surged back hot and suffocating. She felt the scream building in her throat, the same helpless scream that had torn from her as she watched her father die. She saw Holloway's face, not the robber's, his lips twisted in a sneer of victory. The spurs jingled as he shifted his weight, and for a terrifying, illogical moment, she was certain it was him. Her trauma wasn't a memory. It was a ghost, and it had just walked back into her life. The sun cast long, skeletal shadows across Promise Creek's main street as Kate swept the boardwalk in front of Turner's General Store. The alkali dust, a fine, gritty film that coated every surface in town, rose in a pale cloud with each flick of her broom. It was 2 days after the bank robbery. The thieves had made off with nearly $1,000 and vanished into the unforgiving expanse of the plains, leaving behind a town simmering with fear and the lingering echo of silver spurs that only Kate seemed to truly hear. For her, the incident had been a brutal reminder that the past was never truly buried. It just lay in a shallow grave, waiting for the right sound to claw its way back to the surface. At 23, Kate had honed a kind of severe grace. Her chestnut hair was pinned back in a practical knot, and her blue calico dress, though simple, was impeccably clean. The 6 years since her father's death had been a crucible forging her grief and fear into a quiet, unyielding determination. She had managed to keep the store alive through sheer will and countless 18-hour days, a solitary monument to the man who had built it. Yet for all the hardship, a fierce light remained in her azure eyes, a spark that neither poverty nor tragedy had managed to extinguish. "Morning, Miss Turner," Sheriff Dawson called as he ambled past his gate, slow and deliberate. The aging lawman tipped his hat, his expression a familiar mixture of pity and a grudging admiration he reserved just for her. Sheriff Kate acknowledged with a curt nod, her sweeping uninterrupted. His sympathy was a currency she refused to trade in. He'd been there that day, a face in the crowd, a man with a badge who had done nothing as Victor Holloway appointed himself judge, jury, and executioner on the town's main street. His inaction had been a betrayal as sharp as any bullet. The bell above the store door jingled, and Martha Wilkins emerged, a brown paper parcel tucked securely under one arm. A stout woman with kind eyes and a face etched with the wisdom of 60-odd years. Martha had become a surrogate mother to Kate, offering a steady supply of freshly baked bread and sensible advice in equal measure. "I've left those account books on your desk, dear Martha," said her voice, a warm counterpoint to the morning chill. "And don't forget the town meeting tonight. They're discussing the railroad proposal. I'll be there." Kate nodded. The railroad was a double-edged sword. It promised opportunity, new goods, new customers, perhaps even the capital to finally expand the store. But in Promise Creek, a town ruled by the inertia of fear change, was an unwelcome guest, viewed with deep and abiding suspicion. As Martha departed, Kate's gaze was drawn to a cloud of dust rising from the east road. A lone rider approached at a steady, unhurried pace. Strangers were not an uncommon sight, as Promise Creek served as a necessary stop on the long trail between larger settlements. But something about this rider held her attention. It was his posture, perhaps straight-backed and confident in the saddle, or the way he controlled his magnificent black stallion, with subtle shifts in weight, a seamless union of man and beast. The rider slowed as he entered town, and the alkali dust settling on his well-worn Stetson. Kate found herself pausing her work, leaning against her broom to watch. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair curling slightly from beneath his hat brim. His clothing, though dusty, was of good quality, a dark blue shirt, a black vest, and denim pants, tucked into polished boots. A gun belt was cinched around his waist, the holster tied down to his thigh, in the manner of a man who did not carry his weapon for show. As he passed the general store, his gaze met hers. His eyes were a startling shade of green, set in a sun-weathered face that spoke of years spent under an open sky. They were calm, observant eyes, and for a moment they seemed to see right through the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself. He tipped his hat, a simple gesture of politeness, before continuing toward the saloon. Kate resumed her sweeping with a sudden renewed vigor, annoyed at herself for staring. Handsome cowboys were a common sight, and she had learned long ago that admiring them was as pointless as counting stars. They were transient beings, always moving on, chasing the horizon or the next cattle drive. She had a store to run, a life to maintain. She had no time for drifters. Later that afternoon, as Kate was arranging a new shipment of canned peaches, the bell over the door announced a customer. She looked up to find the stranger from the morning standing just inside, hat in hand. He was surveying the store's neatly organized shelves with an expression of genuine interest. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. His voice was deep and pleasant, carrying a slight Texas drawl that softened the edges of his words. "I'm in need of some supplies." "Of course," Kate replied, her tone strictly professional. "What can I get for you?" "Coffee flour, salt, and some jerky for the trail." He approached the counter, his movements economical and sure. "I'm Quentin Galloway, by the way. Most folks call me Quinn." Catherine Turner, she responded, extending her hand, more out of habit than warmth. The town knew her as Kate, but she reserved Catherine for strangers, a small formal barrier. "You'll find coffee and flour on the shelves to your right, Mr. Galloway." He took her hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused, but there was a gentleness to the touch that surprised her. "Much obliged, Miss Turner." As he gathered his items, Kate found herself studying him surreptitiously. There was a stillness about him, a quiet confidence that set him apart from the boisterous, restless cowboys who usually passed through. It wasn't arrogance, but a deep-seated self-assurance. "You planning to stay in Promise Creek long?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral as she began to tally his purchases on a small slate. "That depends," Quinn replied, placing a heavy bag of Arbuckles' coffee on the counter. "I'm looking for work. Heard the Harper Ranch might be hiring." Kate's hand stilled. "Harper's Place. You might want to reconsider." Quinn raised a dark eyebrow. "Any particular reason?" "Harper's land borders the Rocking H. Victor Holloway's ranch," she said, her voice flat. "Holloway doesn't take kindly to anyone who works for his competitors." She hesitated, the memory of jingling spurs and her father's blood still fresh in her mind. "He's not a man you want as an enemy." Quinn's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something cold in his green eyes. "I've heard of Holloway. His reputation travels." "Then you know to be careful." Kate finished her calculations and wrapped his purchases in brown paper, tying them with twine. "That'll be $2.35. Quinn placed 3 silver dollars on the worn wooden counter. "Keep the change, Miss Turner. And thank you for the warning." His eyes met hers again, and for a fleeting moment she felt a sense of connection, a shared understanding that she couldn't quite name. "Just being neighborly," she replied, pushing the package toward him. "Good luck with the job search, Mr. Galloway." As he left, Kate watched him through the large front window, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. What had brought a man like Quentin Galloway to a place like Promise Creek, and why had the mention of Victor Holloway caused that flicker of what looked disturbingly like recognition and anger in his eyes? The dust he stirred as he walked down the street seemed to hang in the air, a portent of unsettled things to come. The town meeting was held in the church, its whitewashed walls and simple pews providing the only space in Promise Creek large enough to accommodate the collective weight of the town's anxieties. Kate sat near the back, partially shielded by the broad shoulders of the Peterson family, preferring to observe rather than participate. The air was thick with the scent of pine polish old hymn books and the faint, ever-present smell of dust. Mayor Wallace, a man whose spine seemed to be made of gelatin, was droning on about the economic boons the railroad would bring when the heavy oak doors opened. Quentin Galloway slipped inside his large frame, momentarily silhouetted against the deepening twilight. He moved with a quiet grace that belied his size, taking a seat in the last pew. A ripple of whispers passed through the congregation as heads turned to scrutinize the newcomer. Kate wasn't surprised to see him. It was common for new arrivals to attend such gatherings to get the lay of the land. What did surprise her was the distinct, unwelcome quickening of her own pulse when he met her gaze and offered a subtle nod of acknowledgement. And of course, Mayor Wallace continued his voice, regaining the attention of the room. "We must consider Mr. Holloway's exceedingly generous offer to donate a parcel of his own land for the new station." This announcement was met with a smattering of murmurs, some of approval, others of uneasy shifting. Kate's jaw tightened. Victor Holloway's generosity always came with a price, usually paid by someone else. "I believe Mr. Holloway would like to address the town," Wallace said, gesturing toward the front pew as if presenting a king. Victor Holloway rose, and the room fell silent. At 55, he remained a formidable presence, tall and barrel-chested, with a mane of silver-streaked dark hair and cold, calculating eyes that missed nothing. He was dressed in an expensive, tailored suit, a stark contrast to the homespun attire of most residents, a man who wore his power as easily as his clothes. Friends, neighbors. He began, his voice a rich baritone that carried effortlessly through the church. Progress is coming to Promise Creek, whether we welcome it or not. I am simply suggesting we control that progress, shape it to our benefit. His gaze swept the room, a predator scanning its territory. It lingered for a fraction of a second on Kate, a flicker of cold amusement in his eyes, before moving on. The railroad means prosperity for all of us. My offer of land comes with no strings attached, merely the desire to see our town flourish. The lie was so bald, so audacious, that Kate couldn't stop the words from escaping. And what exactly do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Holloway? A collective intake of breath swept through the church. Few people ever challenged Holloway directly. He turned his head slowly, his smile a thin, bloodless line that did not reach his eyes. Miss Turner, always a pleasure to hear your perspective. I get the same thing everyone gets: growth, opportunity, increased value for my investments. His tone hardened, a layer of steel beneath the velvet, and the satisfaction of helping build something that will outlast us all. How very charitable, Kate said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. Holloway's smile tightened. I've always believed in giving back to the community, Miss Turner. A lesson your father might have benefited from understanding. The mention of her father was a deliberate cruelty, a poisoned dart aimed straight at her heart. A hot surge of anger coursed through her, but before she could retort, another voice cut through the thick tension. Seems to me, Quinn Galloway said, rising to his feet from the back pew, that the location of a railroad station affects every business in town. Might be worth hearing some other perspectives before any decisions are made. Every eye in the church swiveled to face Quinn. Holloway assessed him with a cold, dismissive glare. And you are? Quentin Galloway, new to town. Well, Mr. Galloway, Holloway said, his tone dripping with condescension, in Promise Creek, we generally prefer that newcomers observe and learn our ways before offering their unsolicited opinions. Quinn didn't flinch. His posture remained relaxed, but his green eyes were fixed on Holloway, steady and unyielding. Where I come from, a man's ideas stand on their own merit, not on how long he's lived in one place. A few scattered murmurs of agreement rose from the pews, a quiet act of rebellion that surprised Kate. Holloway noticed them too, and his expression darkened for a moment before he smoothed it back into a mask of civility. A fair point, Mr. Galloway. Perhaps you'll stay long enough to contribute more of your wisdom. With that, Holloway resumed his seat. But Kate saw how his eyes remained locked on Quinn, a silent promise of retribution. The meeting dragged on, but Kate paid little attention. Her thoughts were consumed by the man who had just painted a target on his own back and the chilling implications of Holloway's displeasure. As the meeting concluded, Kate slipped out quickly, desperate to avoid any confrontation. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks as she hurried down the church steps. Miss Turner, a voice called from behind her. Quinn Galloway approached his long strides, quickly closing the distance between them. May I walk you home? Kate hesitated. That's not necessary, Mr. Galloway. I'd consider it a favor, he persisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'm staying at the boarding house near your store anyway. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. They walked in silence for a few moments, the sound of their boots on the dusty street the only sound between them. You shouldn't have challenged him like that, Kate said finally, her voice low. He doesn't forget things like that. Quinn glanced down at her, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat brim. Neither do I. There was a weight to his words that made Kate stop and face him directly under the pale glow of the moon. What exactly brings you to Promise Creek, Mr. Galloway? And don't tell me it's just a job you're after." He studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're direct, Miss Turner. I appreciate that." He removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Let's just say I have business with Victor Holloway." "Old business." "What kind of business?" "The kind that's waited 6 years to be concluded." A chill, entirely unrelated to the night air, traced a path down Kate's spine. 6 years. The same length of time she had been living with the ghost of her father's murder. 6 years. Quinn nodded slowly. "I was riding with a cattle drive up in Montana when it happened. By the time word reached me, it was too late to come back." "Come back? You've been to Promise Creek before." "No," he said softly, his voice laced with a deep old pain. "But my younger brother was here. His name was Patrick Galloway." Kate's breath hitched. Patrick Galloway. A name she hadn't heard spoken in years. A polite, hard-working young cowboy who'd worked briefly at the Harper Ranch before disappearing without a trace. The official story, the one Holloway's influence had cemented into fact, was that he'd been caught rustling cattle and had fled to escape justice. They said he was a rustler," she whispered. Quinn's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "My brother wasn't a thief. He wrote to me. Told me he'd received threats from Holloway, warnings to leave Harper's employ. His last letter, it mentioned he'd found evidence of Holloway's men altering brands on Harper's cattle. He looked away, his profile, a rigid silhouette against the starry sky. 3 weeks after I got that letter, I received word he'd vanished. No body was ever found." Kate felt a wave of empathy so profound, it almost buckled her knees. She knew what it was to have a life irrevocably shattered by Victor Holloway. "Mr. Galloway, if you're here seeking revenge—" "I'm here seeking justice," he interrupted, his voice firm and clear. "And the truth." They had reached the general store. Kate unlocked the door, but paused in the threshold, and the lantern light from inside, spilling onto the boardwalk. Promise Creek isn't kind to those who stand against Victor Holloway. People have tried before. "Like your father?" Quinn asked gently. Kate stiffened. "How did you—" "Small towns talk, Miss Turner. I'm sorry for your loss." She gave a small, jerky nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Be careful, Mr. Galloway. Holloway has the sheriff, the mayor, and half the town in his pocket. The other half is too afraid to act." She stepped inside. "Thank you for walking me home. Good night." "Good night, Miss Turner," Quinn replied, settling his hat back on his head. "And thank you for the warning." He paused, his green eyes glinting in the lantern light. "But I should mention, I've never been particularly good at taking advice about staying away from things." As Kate closed and bolted the door, the silence of the store settled around her. But it wasn't peaceful. It was charged with a new dangerous energy. Quentin Galloway was a stone cast into a stagnant pond, and the ripples he was creating threatened to swamp the fragile peace she had so painstakingly built for herself. The following days settled into a tense, watchful quiet. Quinn Galloway, true to his word, secured work at Harper's Ranch, a move that was tantamount to a declaration of war in Holloway's eyes. Holloway's men, rough-looking cowboys with cold eyes and hands that never strayed far from their pistols, became a more visible presence in town. They loitered outside the saloon, their gazes lingering on Kate's store. Their presence a silent, suffocating reminder of who held the real power in Promise Creek. A week after the town meeting, as Kate was closing up for the night, the store's bell jingled. Sheriff Dawson entered, removing his hat with a weary sigh. "Evening, Miss Turner," he said, his expression grave. "Thought I should stop by. Have a word." Kate continued counting the day's meager receipts, not looking up. What about Sheriff? This newcomer, Galloway. I understand you've been friendly with him. Kate's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. If by friendly you mean I sold him supplies and he walked me home from a public meeting, then yes. Dawson leaned his portly frame against the counter, the wood groaning in protest. Kate, I've known you since you were knee-high. Your father was a good man despite his disagreements with certain folks. I'd hate to see you get caught up in trouble. What trouble exactly? Galloway's asking questions all over town. Questions about his brother, about Holloway's business practices. That kind of curiosity. It isn't healthy around here. Kate set down her pencil, her patience wearing thin as a gambler's promise. And as the sheriff, shouldn't you be interested in answering those questions, a man disappeared. His brother was a cattle thief who fled. Justice Dawson interrupted his voice, taking on a hard, rehearsed edge. Nothing more to it. Is that what Holloway told you to say? The sheriff's face hardened. The weak-willed pity was gone, replaced by a flash of anger. You're walking a dangerous line, girl. I'm here as a friend, warning you. Keep your distance from Galloway. He won't be in Promise Creek long. The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. Thank you for your concern, Sheriff, Kate said, her voice dripping with ice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish here. Dawson jammed his hat back on his head, pausing at the door. Holloway remembers it was your father who hired Patrick Galloway first, before Harper took him on. He's wondering if there might be more to this Quinn Galloway showing up at your store so quick. My father hired half the young men who came through this town looking for honest work, Kate retorted, her voice even despite the tremor in her hands. And Mr. Galloway came to my store because it's the only general store in town. Nothing more to it than that. The sheriff nodded, though his eyes were full of doubt. Just be careful, Kate. For your own sake. After he left, Kate locked the door with trembling hands. The connection between her father and Patrick Galloway was a thread she hadn't considered. She remembered Patrick, now a quiet, polite boy with the same startling green eyes as his brother. Her father had hired him to help with deliveries and had spoken highly of his work ethic. When Harper offered him a better wage as a full-time ranch hand, her father had encouraged him to take it. 2 months later, Patrick Galloway had vanished, and her father was dead. She climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the store, her mind racing. She had always accepted the town's narrative her father had died over his debts to Holloway loans taken to keep the store afloat. But what if it was more complicated? What if his death was a loose end? Holloway needed to tie up a punishment for asking the wrong questions about a missing boy. The next morning, Quinn Galloway's entered the store. He looked tired, the dust of the ranch ground into his clothes, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. Miss Turner, he greeted her, removing his hat. I hope I find you well. Mr. Galloway. She acknowledged, her heart giving a small, traitorous leap. She gestured for him to follow her to the back room, away from the prying eyes of anyone who might be watching from the street. Once there, she closed the door partway. My father hired Patrick briefly, she confirmed, before he could even ask. He liked your brother. Said he was honest and hardworking. Quinn's expression softened. That sounds like Pat. He paused, his gaze searching her face. Miss Turner. I've been talking to some of the old hands at Harper's. They say your father's death might have been connected to my brother's disappearance. They say he confronted Holloway, demanding to know what happened to Patrick. The information hit Kate like a physical blow. Her father, a quiet, gentle man, confronting the most dangerous man in the territory. It explained the tension she'd seen in him during those last few weeks, the long hours he'd spent in this very room, poring over his ledgers, with the door closed. I didn't know she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He tried to protect me from his worries. I'm not trying to dredge up painful memories, Quinn said, his voice gentle. But if our losses are connected, perhaps we can help each other find the truth. Sheriff Dawson paid me a visit last night, she said, deciding in that moment to trust him completely. He warned me to stay away from you. He said you wouldn't be in Promise Creek long. Quinn's expression grew grim. That sounds like a threat. It was. I made those enemies 6 years ago when my brother died, Quinn replied. I'm just finally in a position to do something about it. He took a step closer, the small space of the storeroom suddenly charged with intensity. I'm going to find evidence of what happened to Patrick, prove Holloway's involvement, and I'm going to bring him to justice. Real justice, not the kind Dawson dispenses from Holloway's pocket. That's a path that leads to a hanging or a bullet, Mr. Galloway. Some things are worth the risk, Miss Turner. He reached out and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. I think your father understood that. His words struck a chord deep within her. Her father's courage had gotten him killed. But as Quinn looked at her, his green eyes filled with a conviction she hadn't seen in anyone in years, she felt a flicker of that same courage igniting within herself. My father kept meticulous records, she heard herself say. Ledgers, diaries, letters. I keep them in a trunk upstairs. Perhaps there's something in them. Something he wrote down about Patrick. For the first time since he'd arrived, Quinn Galloway smiled a genuine smile that transformed his tired, sun-weathered face. I'd be mighty grateful if you'd let me take a look, Miss Turner. Kate, she corrected him softly. My friends call me Kate. Kate, he repeated, his smile widening. It's a pleasure. That evening, they sat at the small table in her apartment, a lantern casting a warm glow over the stacks of her father's old ledgers and journals. As Quinn carefully turned the fragile yellowed pages, a world Kate had only glimpsed as a child came to life. Her father's neat sloping script detailed business transactions, observations about the weather, and poignant notes about her mother who had died years earlier. And then Quinn found it. An entry dated just 2 weeks before her father's death. Spoke with VH again today. About young Patrick G. Holloway, claims the boy ran off, but his story doesn't sit right. The boy was too earnest, too proud of his work. Met with Harper. He agrees. Something foul has happened here. We must be careful. H. made a comment today. A strange, bitter remark about the carelessness of young men and the price fathers have to pay. It chilled me to the bone. Below the entry was another, more cryptic line. The Holloway tragedy. Must look into the old newspaper records from Silver Creek. It might explain everything. The Holloway tragedy. Kate read over his shoulder. What does that mean? I don't know, Quinn said, his brow furrowed in thought. But your father clearly thought it was important. He looked up at her, the lantern light reflecting in his intense green eyes. Silver Creek is 2 days' ride from here. They have a newspaper office with archives going back 20 years. I need to go. It's too dangerous, Quinn. Holloway's men are watching you. They'll follow you. Then I'll leave before dawn. They won't be expecting it. He gently closed the journal. Kate, this could be it. The key to understanding why Holloway is the way he is. Why he was so quick to violence against Patrick, against your father. A plan began to form in her mind, a risky but necessary deception. You'll need a reason to be gone for several days. A reason that satisfies Holloway. She stood and began to pace the small room. There's a cattle auction in Clayton at the end of the week. Harper is sending a few men. I'll speak to him. will let it be known that you're going with them. But you'll ride for Silver Creek instead." Quinn watched her, a look of admiration on his face. "You think quickly on your feet, Kate Turner." "I've had to," she replied simply. "Survival has a way of sharpening the mind." The investigation was no longer just his. It was theirs. A shared quest for a truth that had been buried for 6 long years. And with every page they turned, with every secret they uncovered, the bond between them grew stronger, forged in the crucible of their shared loss. Quinn rode out 2 days later, ostensibly with Harper's men heading for the Clayton auction. But under the cover of a pre-dawn darkness, he had split from the group and turned his black stallion midnight south toward Silver Creek. Kate spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation, her days filled with the mundane rhythm of running the store, her nights consumed by a gnawing anxiety. The silence from Quinn was a heavy blanket each passing day, adding another layer of weight. To her surprise, Victor Holloway paid a visit to the store. He didn't come to threaten, but to purchase a box of expensive cigars, his demeanor one of polished, almost charming civility. "I hear your new friend Mr. Galloway has taken a temporary leave of us," Holloway remarked casually as Kate wrapped his purchase. "He's helping Mr. Harper with the cattle auction in Clayton." Kate replied, her voice a carefully constructed wall of neutrality. "Ah, yes. A fine opportunity for a young man to prove his worth." Holloway set his cold eyes studying her. He paused, then added, "It is a dangerous world, Miss Turner, full of unforeseen accidents. A man can be riding along one moment and the next, well, life is fragile, especially for those who are careless." He smiled, a chilling gesture devoid of any warmth. "You would do well to remember that." The veiled threat left her hands trembling long after he had gone. His words echoed her father's journal entry. The carelessness of young men and the price fathers have to pay. It was a piece of a puzzle she couldn't yet solve, but the edges were beginning to take shape. On the 5th day, Quinn returned. He appeared at her back door after nightfall, looking exhausted, his clothes coated in a thick layer of dust, but his eyes burned with a feverish intensity. He was holding a small oilcloth-wrapped packet. "I found it," he said, his voice raspy with fatigue, as he stepped into the warmth of her apartment. He collapsed into a chair at her small table, while Kate quickly brought him a glass of water. He unwrapped the packet, revealing several pages of old yellowed newspaper, carefully cut from a larger volume. He spread them on the table. The headline from the Silver Creek Register was dated 10 years prior. "Tragic accident at the North Star mine. Local boy killed in cart collapse." Kate read the article, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. The story detailed a catastrophic accident at a small silver mine just outside Promise Creek, a mine that had long since been abandoned. A loaded ore cart had broken free from its winch and careened down an incline, striking and killing a single victim, 12-year-old Thomas Holloway. Holloway's son. Kate breathed, looking at Quinn. His only child. Quinn confirmed, his finger tracing the lines of text. "But look here. The article lists the names of the 2 young mine workers who were operating the winch." He pointed to the paragraph. Kate leaned closer, and the names seemed to leap off the page: James Turner and Patrick Galloway. The room tilted. Kate had to grip the back of a chair to steady herself. Her father, Quinn's brother. They had been there. They had been involved. "My father never spoke of it," she stammered. "And Patrick was only a boy then, surely." "He was 16, Quinn said softly. "Old enough to work a man's job. According to the coroner's inquest, it was ruled an accident. A frayed cable on the winch snapped. No one was held legally responsible. But you and I both know that doesn't mean no one was blamed. The pieces crashed into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about debt. It wasn't about land or cattle. It was about revenge. A cold, patient, decade-long vendetta. Holloway wasn't a simple, greedy tyrant. He was a grieving father twisted into a monster by a loss so profound it had poisoned his entire soul. He had waited years systematically destroying the lives and families of the two young men he held responsible for his son's death. He hadn't killed Kate's father over a loan. The loan was just the excuse, the public justification for a private execution. And he had hunted down Patrick, a boy he likely never forgot, to complete his bitter retribution. He's been destroying our families all this time. Kate whispered, a wave of nausea washing over her. Quinn reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was a lifeline in the swirling chaos of this new, terrible truth. Yes, he said, his voice grim. And now we know why. A floorboard creaked in the store below. Both of them froze their eyes, locking in shared alarm. Quinn was on his feet in an instant, his hand already on the butt of his revolver. He moved silently to the top of the stairs, peering down into the darkness. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor below. A match flared and a lantern was lit, casting eerie dancing shadows up the stairwell. "We know you're up there, Galloway," a voice snarled. It was Sheriff Dawson. "And you, Miss Turner. We saw his horse tied out back. Holloway wants to see you both." Quinn looked back at Kate, his expression hard and resolute. "Stay behind me," he whispered. They were trapped. The revelation of the past had led them directly into a confrontation in the present. As the heavy tread of boots started up the stairs, Kate knew their shared investigation had reached its endgame. The fight for justice had just become a fight for survival. The lamplight from below threw Sheriff Dawson's shadow up the narrow staircase, a bloated, menacing shape that seemed to precede him. He was followed by two of Holloway's most trusted men, their faces grim and their hands resting on their holstered guns. "There's no need for trouble," Dawson said, his voice attempting a tone of authority that his nervous eyes betrayed. "Holloway just wants a conversation. A conversation with guns." Quinn countered, not moving from his position at the top of the stairs, his body shielding Kate from view. "I don't think so." "Don't be a fool, Galloway. There are two of us and only one of you," one of Holloway's men growled. "Three of us," Kate said, stepping out from behind Quinn. In her hands, she held her father's old double-barreled shotgun, its twin muzzles looking like two dark, hollow eyes in the dim light. "And I know how to use it." Dawson faltered, his eyes widening at the sight of the shotgun. He had clearly not anticipated armed resistance from the town's quiet shopkeeper. For a tense moment, silence stretched thin as a gambler's promise. The four of them were locked in a standoff on the narrow staircase. "And this is foolishness," Dawson finally blustered. "Catherine, put that thing down. I have a warrant for Galloway's arrest. Assault." "A lie," Kate said, her voice cold and steady. "Just like the lie you've been living for the past 6 years, Sheriff. A paid dog for a monster." The insult hit its mark. A flush crept up Dawson's neck. Before he could respond, Quinn spoke, his voice calm and clear. "It's over, Dawson. We know everything. We know about the North Star mine. We know about Thomas Holloway." The name struck the sheriff like a physical blow. His face went pale, his already weak resolve crumbling completely. The truth spoken aloud had shattered the foundation of fear and lies he had stood upon for years. "You now," Quinn continued, pressing his advantage. You're going to turn around and walk back down those stairs. And you're going to tell Holloway that this ends now. The territorial marshal will be hearing about this." One of Holloway's men, less easily cowed, made a move. "The only thing that ends now is you." He snarled, his hand dropping to his gun. But Quinn was faster. His revolver was drawn and leveled in a single fluid motion. "I wouldn't," he warned, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. The cowboy froze, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. The standoff tightened, the air crackling with the promise of violence. It was Dawson who broke. "Stand down, Jed," the sheriff ordered, his voice trembling. He looked up at Quinn and Kate, his face a mask of defeat. It's over." Jed shot him a look of disbelief, but Dawson was already backing down the stairs, his hands held up in a gesture of surrender. The other man, after a moment's hesitation, followed suit. As their footsteps receded and the front door of the store slammed shut, Kate lowered the shotgun, her arms aching from the tension. She looked at Quinn, her heart still hammering against her ribs. "They'll be back," she said, "with Holloway and more men." "I know," Quinn said, his eyes already scanning the room, calculating their options. "We can't stay here. We need to get out of town, get to the marshal in Fort Collins." He moved to the window, peering cautiously down at the street below. "They'll be watching the roads." He turned back to her, his face grim. "There's only one place we can go where they might not think to look for us immediately. A place where we might have an advantage." "Where?" "The old North Star mine," he said. "It's where this all began. It's time we ended it there." The climb to the abandoned North Star mine was treacherous in the dark. A storm was brewing in the west, and the wind moaned through the skeletal pines that clung to the mountainside, whipping Kate's hair across her face. They rode midnight hard, the powerful stallion navigating the rocky terrain with an unnerving confidence. Behind them, the lights of Promise Creek seemed to shrink, a tiny island of fragile order in a vast sea of wilderness and chaos. The mine entrance was a dark, gaping maw in the side of the mountain, framed by the rotting timbers of the old headframe. A sense of profound dread settled over Kate as she dismounted. This was a place of ghosts, haunted by a decade-old tragedy that had poisoned all of their lives. "We'll secure the horse in that stand of aspens," Quinn said, his voice low. "Then we find a defensible position inside." The first fat drops of rain began to fall as they entered the mine, the air inside cool and damp, thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. The main tunnel was wide enough for an ore cart, its tracks rusted and broken. Smaller tunnels branched off into the darkness, a labyrinth of black passages. Quinn lit a lantern, the flickering light revealing walls of damp, glistening rock. "We'll go in about 100 feet, he decided. "There's a bend in the main tunnel. It will give us cover." They didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the sound of approaching horses reached them, followed by shouted orders that were quickly swallowed by the rising wind. The storm had broken, and rain was now lashing down in torrential sheets. "He's here," Kate whispered, her hand tightening on the stock of the shotgun. "I know," Quinn replied, checking the chambers of his revolver. "This is it, Kate. Whatever happens, stay close." The light of several lanterns appeared at the mine entrance, casting long, distorted shadows down the tunnel. Victor Holloway stepped into the mine, flanked by Sheriff Dawson and 4 of his men. Holloway was no longer the polished cattle baron. The veneer of civility had been stripped away. His face was a thunderous mask of rage, his eyes burning with a cold, merciless fire. The storm outside seemed a pale reflection of the tempest raging within him. "No Galloway." Holloway's voice boomed, echoing off the rock walls. "I know you're in here. There's nowhere left for you to run. You and the girl, come out now." Silence was their only reply. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Holloway sneered, taking a few steps deeper into the mine. "Digging up the past, you have no idea what you've unearthed." He stopped, his gaze sweeping the darkness ahead. That day your brother and her father took my son from me. They were careless, laughing and joking while my boy, my Thomas, bled out in the dirt. His voice cracked the raw grief of a decade ago, still sharp and agonizing. They called it an accident. An accident. As if that word could ever contain the magnitude of my loss. From their hiding spot around the bend, Kate could see the anguish contorting his features. For the first time, she saw not a monster, but a broken man, a man so consumed by his pain that he had become a vessel for it. "Your father should have paid with his life that day." Holloway roared, his voice now directed into the darkness where he knew Kate was hiding. "But the law protected him, so I waited. I took his business, his pride, and then finally his life. It was a debt long overdue." "And what about Patrick?" Quinn's voice called out, calm and steady from the shadows. "He was just a boy, Holloway. What did he do to deserve your justice?" Holloway laughed, a harsh grating sound. "Your brother came back. He came back to my town, worked on my land, as if he had no memory, no guilt. He had the same careless look in his eyes that he had that day. I couldn't let that stand. I gave him a chance. I told him to leave. But he was stubborn, just like your father, girl. He started asking questions. He had to be silenced." A deafening clap of thunder rolled through the canyon, and at the same moment, a section of the rain-soaked cliff face above the mine entrance gave way. Rocks and a river of mud cascaded down, partially blocking the entrance. The lanterns of Holloway's men flickered and died as they scrambled for safety, plunging the tunnel into near-total darkness, save for the single lantern Holloway held. "Now," Quinn hissed. He fired a single shot, not at a man, but at the rock wall just above Holloway's head. The ricochet sent stone shards flying, and Holloway dropped his lantern with a cry of pain. It shattered on the tracks, the oil igniting in a whoosh of flame that cast the tunnel in a terrifying, flickering light. In the chaotic glare, Kate saw Sheriff Dawson break from the group. He wasn't running toward the exit. He was running toward them, his face a mess of terror and desperation. "He's insane," Dawson yelled. "He was going to kill you both." One of Holloway's men raised his pistol to fire at the fleeing sheriff, but Quinn's revolver barked again, and the man crumpled to the ground. The firefight erupted, the roar of guns deafening in the enclosed space. Amid the chaos, Kate saw Holloway. He had retrieved a pistol and was staggering to his feet, his eyes wild. He wasn't looking at Quinn. He was looking at her. He raised his gun, his face a mask of pure hatred. Time seemed to slow. She saw the flash from his barrel an instant before she heard the report. She braced for the impact, but it never came. Sheriff Dawson had thrown himself in front of her, his body, taking the force of the bullet meant for her. He collapsed at her feet, a dark stain spreading across his chest, his eyes wide with a final shocked atonement. The sight of Dawson falling, of his last redemptive act, broke through her fear. Her grief and rage coalesced into a single point of cold, clear purpose. She raised the shotgun. Holloway was fumbling to reload, his movements clumsy in the dying firelight. He was vulnerable, unarmed, an easy shot. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Vengeance was hers for the taking. The face of her father bleeding on the boardwalk filled her mind, the jingle of silver spurs, the years of fear and hardship. But then another image surfaced. Holloway's face as he spoke of his son, the raw, unending agony of a grieving father. Killing him wouldn't be justice. It would just be another act in the same tragic play. It would make her him. No, she whispered, lowering the barrel of the shotgun just as Quinn tackled Holloway, sending them both crashing to the muddy floor of the tunnel. The fight was brief and brutal. Quinn, fueled by years of anger and a need for true justice, quickly subdued the larger man. As the last of Holloway's men surrendered, the only sounds in the tunnel were the ragged gasps for breath and the steady dripping of water from the ceiling. Justice had not come from the barrel of a gun, but from the choice to not fire it. The aftermath was a somber, rain-soaked tableau. Marshal Hedges, alerted by a rider from Harper, arrived with a posse an hour after the fighting had stopped their horses, picking their way carefully through the mudslide at the mine's entrance. They found Quinn holding a disarmed and defeated Victor Holloway at gunpoint, while Kate knelt beside the body of Sheriff Dawson, a silent testament to the day's complicated sacrifices. Holloway was taken into custody, his face a blank mask of disbelief. As he was led away in chains, his eyes met Kate's one last time. There was no remorse in them, only the hollowed-out emptiness of a man who had lost everything twice over. The town he had built, the vengeance he had nurtured it, had all turned to ash. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and quiet reckonings. Holloway's confession in the mine, overheard by his own men, sealed his fate. The truth of the last decade in Promise Creek came to light, and the town, shocked out of its fearful complacency, began the slow and painful process of healing. Kate and Quinn found themselves at the center of this new beginning. They had to give their testimonies, recount the painful events that had led them to the North Star mine. But in the quiet moments between the official proceedings, they grappled with the more complex truth they now shared. Their families were not entirely innocent victims. A moment of youthful carelessness from a father and a brother had inadvertently set in motion a decade of tragedy. It was a heavy burden, but it was a shared one. Their bond, forged in a quest for justice against a common enemy, was now tempered by this new complicated understanding of their intertwined pasts. It was a foundation built not on simple romance, but on the bedrock of a shared painful history. A week after Holloway was transported to the territorial prison to await his trial, Kate and Quinn rode out from town. They didn't speak much on the journey, the silence between them comfortable and deep. They followed an old, overgrown track that led to a secluded corner of what had once been Holloway's vast ranch. There, under the shade of a lone, ancient cottonwood tree, was a small, fenced-off plot of land. Inside was a single simple headstone weathered by 10 years of wind and rain. The inscription was faint but still legible. Thomas Holloway, beloved son, aged 12. They stood before the small grave, the resting place of the boy, whose death had been the catalyst for so much pain. This, Kate realized, was the heart of the storm, the quiet epicenter of all their grief. Quinn reached down and gently removed a stubborn weed that was growing near the base of the stone. Kate, in turn, knelt down. She had picked a single resilient Indian paintbrush on their ride up its vibrant scarlet petals, a stark slash of color against the muted landscape. She carefully placed the wildflower on the stone. It was not an act of forgiveness for the man Victor Holloway had become, but an act of acknowledgement for the boy he had lost. It was a recognition of the shared loss that had defined all of their lives, a quiet prayer for a peace that had been denied to them all for far too long. As she stood, Quinn took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. They stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip toward the scarlet glow of the mesas at sunset. They had not erased the past, but they had chosen to break its violent cycle. Vengeance was a fire that consumed everything it touched. They were choosing to build something new from the embers, a future founded not on retribution, but on healing understanding and the quiet strength of two survivors who had found in each other a reason to hope again.